Now it's 11:30, so we'll get started. So welcome to our Hybrid Working for Bigger Businesses webinar. This came about really as we have lots of conversations in the market with many smaller organisations who seem to be adapting to hybrid quite well, but bigger businesses and larger scale organisations tend to struggle due to the nature of the complexity of transitioning to hybrids. So I'm joined today by the Director of Hybrid Working for the House of Commons, Emma Wharton, and Workwell Bristol's hybrid working and change management expert, Kristal McNamara. Thank you for joining us. I'll ask you to introduce yourselves properly in a second. I know you're both super busy, so really appreciated you being here. Over the next 45, possibly up to 60 minutes, if we get lots of questions, we're going to try and find out how to understand if the hybrid model is the right fit for your organisation or business, how to begin developing a strategy that works for your business at scale, how to start putting that strategy into action, how to deal with some of the key challenges that hybrid and distributed working throw up, and then more importantly, maybe how to keep your people happy and engaged and informed throughout that process. So there's a lot of ground to cover. Feel free to drop questions and comments in the chat as we go, and I'll try and pick those up as we go through. But let's just get into it, shall we? So let's start right at the beginning with just some of the basics we can whip through really quickly. I hear hybrid, flexible, agile, all sort of used interchangeably when I think they're probably not really interchangeable terms. Emma, could you give us a quick intro and background to yourself, and then maybe define what we're talking about when we do say hybrid?
Yeah, sure. I'm hearing myself back a little bit, so I don't know if you guys are hearing me twice.
Sound fine to us.
Good, great. Yes, I'm Director of Hybrid Working at the House of Commons. I've worked in this field quite a scarily long time, since the early 2000s now. First, I worked in the field from a building perspective, where I was a consultant for a firm of architects. Then I moved into Cabinet Office and worked on the sort of the policy for smart working, is what they call it in government, across government. And then at EY, where I set up the British standard for smart working, working with government again. And now I'm at the House of the Parliament. So that's a little bit about me. But it's a really good opening question, Toby. So flexible, the way I always interpret it is flexible working is the kind of contractual type of flexible working. So it could be part-time, compressed hours, contractual home working, that kind of thing. And I see a hybrid doesn't require a contractual change. I really see it as an evolution of agile or smart working, or the myriad of other terms that are often used. Hybrid is about like splitting your time between the office and remote locations. I think the difference compared with agile is that at the time that agile was the kind of main language used, I think it was a lot about focus was on using buildings really efficiently, whereas hybrid is more sort of people-centered. It's based on sort of choice and trust of where people can work and empowering people to choose where it is best for them to be most productive. So yeah, in summary, the difference, I think, is hybrid is underpinned by a company culture of trust, whereas agile was more about building footprints and reducing down real estate.
All sort of buildings and process. Okay, brilliant. That's really helpful. Thank you. And Kristal, do you want to give us a quick intro and maybe following on from what Emma said there, just talk us through some of the pros and cons of hybrid working, and then maybe if we could add on to that, what are some of the issues that larger organisations face when it comes to hybrid that smaller ones maybe get away with? Sorry, it's quite a lot in there, but I'm sure you can.
Thank you. Yes, so my background and experiences was very corporate, worked for lots of kind of corporate organisations, mainly in financial services for years, in large-scale change management roles, so looking after change management. And then about 5 years ago, after having kids and wanting more flexibility, I left that to start essentially consulting around flexible and hybrid working before it was called hybrid working. So very much as Emma's just said, agile working. And looking at really how it can be used to attract and retain talent. And that's just evolved so much since the pandemic. I think we've all realised how much things have moved on. So my role at the moment in my business is really to help focus on engagement with employees, to really help businesses to understand what's right for the individuals, for their teams, and for the organisation, and kind of really create a modern new way of working in their business. So that's what I do. So the pros pros and cons of hybrid working, in my view, based on some kind of really current projects that I'm working on, the key kind of themes from an employee perspective seem to be a demand for as much autonomy as possible, having the choice to work in a way that's best for them, best essentially. A lot of employees think about it quite individually, but from an organisational perspective, it's trying to get them to think about what's also best for the team, the organisation, and maybe their clients. I caveat that with too much autonomy, with no role modelling, with no planning, no guidance, and no leadership is not a good thing. It leaves people unsure on what exactly they should be doing. So there needs to be some guidance. But having mandatory days or forcing employees to come in on particular days doesn't really improve the attraction and retention of talent. And it's kind of what employees are fighting against at the moment. So all the feedback we're getting is, I don't want to be told when to come in. I want to be given that choice. So that goes back to what Emma's just said about hybrid working being about choice and trust. So I'd say, take the kind of theme of autonomy and choice and trust, but build guidance. It takes expertise to get employees to see the bigger picture, that it isn't just about themselves. And a great way of doing that, Emma and I will both talk about engagement with teams and team charters and so on throughout this this presentation, I'm sure. But helping them to kind of take them on the journey, facilitate a process of understanding what's best for everybody, and then building that clear guidance. Engagement is key, really. I've looked at kind of what stats I can include in this today, and some interesting stats on this was 45% of office workers, if they didn't have hybrid working, would consider leaving their job. So that is quite a lot of people thinking they might leave, and 77% of employees thinking that they would prefer a mixture of face-to-face and remote working. So the demand is there for a change. The second question you asked me was about larger scale organisations. So I think what I want to make really clear in this conversation is it isn't just office workers. And I think the assumption is from a lot of research and terminology out there is everyone can work from home. Well, they can't. So in larger businesses who have a mix of maybe office workers, operational workers, frontline workers, not everyone can work from home. So
Yeah.
how can, in really large scale organizations, how can you maximize new ways of working for everyone in your organization? So that might be for frontline or operational workers. It might be shift work, early or late starts. Can they do some admin from home? Could they have more spaces in work to decompress and have more of a home feeling environment? So it's considering different ways of working for everybody. And then in really large organizations, it's how can you make sure you haven't got a huge footprint that's just empty on a Monday and Friday? So that engagement with employees, some are absolutely going to want to work in quieter environments. So how can you maximize the use of your space across a week, I think is really important. But having kind of structure and guidance is really key.
That's brilliant, thank you. There's loads of stuff in there that we'll come back to for a bit more detail in a minute. I think going back to the beginning of some of the things you mentioned there, and when it comes to employee engagement and listening to what people want, Emma, what are some ways that large organisations can take a temperature test, find out what their employees want, and really get a good understanding of that? And then how do they balance that with their organisational needs and maybe their needs as a business? When they figured out what, so like it's a two-part question there, but what's a good way to do some really good employee listening and figure out what people want?
Well, this is definitely something we've been working out over the last few months at Parliament. Really, in a nutshell, sorry, someone just walked past with a very crying baby past the window. I don't know if you can hear it. Joys of home working. Yeah. So in a nutshell, just ask them, ask people how they find that they work best, ask them how they want to work. I think right now, ask them what the positives were that they learned from the from remote working during the pandemic. It's a really tangible question to ask. And this can be done through things like regular pulse surveys, focus groups, listening circles, the people leading on hybrid within the organisation, getting into team meetings and making it an item on agendas. And just keep repeating that over time, because I think things will change as we learn and as we come more out of COVID as well. I think it's really, really important to encourage experimentation to find out what works best. And so I would suggest having a really clear sort of like test and learn phase at the beginning, an experimentation phase. Don't just launch into something, so that people feel that they have the freedom to try things that may not work and then adjust them and try something else and keep doing that. And along the way monitor what is working and what hasn't. Also really importantly, ask the customers what they want, how they want services to be delivered differently. They've changed as well. And again, monitor customer satisfaction or whatever the equivalent is for your organization and see how that changes as you're adjusting how people are working. So I think it's those three elements together. I don't think any one of them works by itself. I think you need all three. So it's asking staff, asking customers, really encouraging experimentation. And from those three like sources of data, you sort of find out what works best for your people. But it's not a one-off thing. You need to keep repeating it over time as you learn, I think.
That time period will probably still be quite long, won't it, for many organisations? Can I just pick up on the test and learn element of that? And Kristal, this might be one for you maybe, but how do you remove the pressure of failure from those tests, and how do you let people know it's okay to fail as they go through? And how do you sort of make those tests equal if you've got an organisation with different business units or several different sort of silos? How do you make those tests feel equal among everyone, and how do you get people comfortable with testing and failing?
So Emma and I have spent a bit of time talking about, how our own approach is to hybrid working, and we both support the use of team charters in our organisation. We call them ways of working charters or WOW charters, and that is a way for teams to get really specific about a way that works for them and it's fair and equitable. So, how will we run a hybrid meeting? How often will we have face-to-face meetings in the office? When we go to the office, what are we going to try and achieve there? And it's a way of it being fair because everybody across the organisation is going through the same process. So the approach is fair and transparent, but actually the outcomes are quite specific. So for a team that can do less home working, they'll obviously go through a slightly different process in terms of the outcome, and then build into that structure a review and feedback loop. So it could be something that is collated through SharePoint, through a centralized team, or it could be something that you as a team just put it an agenda item on your weekly or monthly meetings. Let's review it. Let's adjust the charter. Let's try this for a month, and then let's look at what's happening. So it could be everyone wants to come in on a particular day. Let's say it's a Wednesday. You come in on that day for a few weeks together as a team, and you realize actually it's really difficult to get space together. The smart building technology isn't working well, or it could be it's too noisy on that day, and you can adjust these things. I think just making sure that your structure in time for review and feedback really gives the ability, I wouldn't say necessarily to fail, but to get feedback and adjust and adapt accordingly. It's kind of basically making that constant review and adjustment just part of the everyday. So it's kind of, yes, it's failing on a small scale, but really it's just making regular feedback part of the process, and I think that's really key.
Okay, that's really interesting, thanks. And in terms of those ways of working charters, who is good to generally lead that sort of process? Obviously an external consultant is ideal. If people are doing it internally, who's well placed to lead that process?
So if a large organization has an HR team, it's usually the HR business partners that would be best placed to do that, because they know about the business units, they know about the individual teams, but also by them managing and owning it, they can ensure a consistent approach. So ultimately, if there's two teams who do similar roles across an organization, you would expect the outcomes and the ways of working to be quite similar. If one manager is saying, well, really, I want you all in, and one manager is saying, well, actually, our approach is we're giving you the autonomy, and that's the whole point of having a charter. The HR business partner can manage that and push the any kind of rogue behavior, I guess, from team managers. But I think it's really important to set up the expectations and have an overarching approach from the organization, which is autonomy and choice for employees to decide collectively as a team what's best for all of us as individuals, as a team, for our organization, and for our clients or customers. Those things have got to be included in all of those elements of the charters.
Great, thank you. And that a lot of that feels quite bottom up in terms of motivations and goal setting and things like that. Emma, can I come on to you and ask you about what the role of leadership is in this transition? Where are they in the mix? What behaviours should they be modelling? What responsibilities fall onto their shoulders?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, strong and clear leadership is like really essential, like in any culture change. This is essentially a culture change. Firstly, the leadership needs to be totally clear on what success looks like. And then that will sort of filter down into the guidance that Kristal was talking about, that sort of sets out some high level parameters around hybrid working. And then leaders really have to walk the walk of what they've set out, decided success should look like. And something that I found really helpful is setting something like guiding principles or design principles for hybrid working within the organisation. It could be things like to outline the drivers for it. Really, it's like, we trust our employees. We want to achieve these sustainability goals through it. We want that kind of thing, so that colleagues understand like where the board is at. It's really important that leaders don't just like do hybrid working and what that means for them. And I find it's most helpful if actually the leadership of an organisation do quite different models of hybrid working. So everyone in the organisation has a sort of reference point for their type of job role, but it's really important they really talk about that. And I put a lot of comms out about it, and talk about like what they're doing, because it's their individual preference. It's how they find they work best, and maybe particular tasks they find they work best at home or in the office, and like what parts of their work pattern are driven by the business need, so that people see, what perhaps compromises and personal preference we need to make for business need. And I think I was talking earlier about how it's really important not to just like make one-off decisions. You've got to keep looking at this over time. And so I think for a leadership team, it's really important that hybrid is on their agenda ongoing, as we sort of move into that new culture, so that they can like talk about what the opportunities are that they're finding in their business that hybrid is sort of bringing out, and that they can then really harness those. It could be things like a wider recruitment pool. It could be like really tangible things that they're finding. But also there are potential unintended consequences from hybrid the board needs to keep their eye on. Like, there are real diversity benefits, but there are potential risks as well, with different groups having more stronger preference to work in different places. So the board will need to, really look at that in the context of their kind of corporate risks in big businesses. And I think the leader of the organisation, I've been thinking about what they should do, but how they should work. And I don't think there's no right answer in how the leader of the organisation should work. It could be 5 days a week in the office, 9 till 5, because that's how they feel most productive, or it's because their role can only be done in the office. But I think as long as they are explicit about why they're doing that, then that gives people the sort of freedom to then empowers people to make their own choices based on what their own is. Yeah.
That's great, thank you. And that you mentioned some of the implicit risks there, and Chris, that's something I wanted to ask you about. In terms of, we hear quite a lot about hybrid enabling possibly a two-tier culture, where people who are more present are more visible and get promoted more, or maybe just have got a fear of missing out on interesting projects and things like that. What are some considerations to avoid creating that two-tier culture as a business moves into hybrid?
Yeah, I think, it won't surprise you that I talk about framework all the time. I think poor practice when it comes to, ultimately giving certain people in your organisation opportunities and jobs is because of, that lack of framework and transparency, and that, has been going on for a long time. So the thing that the pandemic has stopped, luckily, is is that kind of Friday night drinks kind of culture where people get promotions because they're mates with the leaders of the organisation. A lot of that has dropped off, and I think it's important not to fall back into that. So having a transparent framework in terms of clear steps for employees to understand what's the career development path in this organisation, what are the promotional opportunities, how that all roles are advertised equally, keeping a level playing field regardless of people are choosing or self-selecting to work from home more often or to work remotely. I mean, some organisations have been so open about their opportunity to attract and retain talent that they're now employing people all over the country or all over the world, and those people just don't physically have the chance to come in, but they might actually be the best people to be the leaders of that organisation in future. So just thinking about this level playing field, I think, is really, really important. Because as Emma says, some people will self-select to work from home because it's a safer, more comfortable environment. But I think also engaging with those underrepresented groups, whether that's through employee resource groups or employee focus groups, to make sure that they have a voice and that they're able to kind of I suppose put forward their views and have a say in the culture of the organisation and the opportunities is really key as well. So be aware of that unconscious bias and try and put in the framework to overcome some of those things.
Okay, thanks. And it sounds like internal comms, which are often a bit of an afterthought and sort of rushed out in many companies without too much strategy behind them. Sounds like internal comms need to be much more deliberate now and much more thought through. What should companies, and either of you could pick this up, how do you begin with an internal comms strategy that works for hybrid and makes everyone feel included? What are some considerations there?
Well, if I talk first of all, and then I'll hand over to Emma, as she said, this is a cultural shift, and all of the research in change management shows that you've got to take employees on the journey. So I would say, literally plan out your path for how you're going to change hybrid working. And it could be, first of all, we'll engage with employees in surveys and workshops and so on. Then we'll review what they've said. Then we'll make some decisions with them about what the steps will be, and then we'll implement it. And then make some plans if you're going to have 4 or 5 steps to engage with them at every single point of those. So tell them now, we're going to go on a journey. We're going to engage with you. We're going to make some decisions. We're going to ask you about it, and then at each of those stages, make sure that you update them. Employees are sat at home often thinking, well, what's going to happen? When are we going back? What's it going to be like? Can I still pick up and drop off my kids from school, or take my dog for a walk at lunchtime, or go to the gym, or whatever? So by engaging with them and creating that comms at every stage, even if you don't have all the answers, is really, really key to take them on that journey and get them to adapt to the change as quickly as possible, and make it a success.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, if I could just add a bit more, I think that's so important, being clear on the uncertainty and when there might be a bit of certainty, and what that whole journey is. We're going to survey every, 6 months, and then we're going to report to the leadership on how things are going, and then we might adjust things, that kind of thing. At House of Commons, I think probably the people I work with most closely are the internal comms team. And as well as all the things that Kristal said, I think other things that have been really helpful are putting out information about what other organisations are doing, inspiring people to work about different ways of different modes of hybrid. Hybrid doesn't just mean, coming in 2 days and staying at home 3 days. There's so many different ways to cut it. And inspiration within the same organisation as well. So it's sharing case studies, but in quite an informal way. And just to loop back to a point that Kristal made right at the start about there are a lot of roles, and there are at the House of Commons actually, that are completely tied to working physically in the office. So we have people who need to be in the chamber, when the chamber's sitting. We have huge numbers of security and operational staff, and it's how to make it fair across all staff. They may not be able to work hybridly, but there may be bits of their roles that they can, or it may be about having more flexibility around shifts. But there are very different channels to reach those audiences than there are to hybrid workers who are on their computers all the time. So we've been being quite creative with notice boards. I've been doing loads of just floor walking, just being physically there and talking to people, and just clearing my diary completely and spending the day to having conversations with people about how they're finding work in this sort of hopefully post-pandemic world. So I think that sort of that FaceTime stuff is really important.
Yeah, still powerful. We'll come on to some sort of FaceTime things in a bit. There's one more point I wanted to address on that element though, which is, I guess, some organisations are a bit worried about what happens when they do a big listening exercise and they get, Kristal, you brought some stats up earlier, say, 60% of the workforce wants to work at home 3 days a week, whatever the stat might be. And then actually organisationally, they realise that probably doesn't work for them in their business model or their organisational model. It's going to have to be in the office more. But because they've gone through the exercise of listening, how do you then bring people back on that journey or break news and they might not particularly want to hear without losing employees? How do you manage that sort of messaging where you've done your listening, actually what the employees want doesn't mesh with what you need to succeed as an organisation? How do you address that disconnect? That's a tough one, so anyone's welcome to say that.
Well, I'll go first. So I think you should expect that when an employee answers a survey, they are just thinking about themselves, and absolutely all of the engagement that we're doing at the moment with workshops with clients is very, what do I want? And that makes sense because of the space that they've been in for the last couple of years. So expect your survey results to be skewed in that way. I go back to what I said about at the beginning. I don't believe that an organisation with kind of more traditional office workers, where employees have proved over the last couple of years that actually they can do their jobs from anywhere, that really it is a requirement for employees to be in the office, 3 or 4 days a week in order to do their jobs. They've proved otherwise in most cases. So I'd say expect that they will be skewed that way, but also employees are really sensible and they understand that they have a job to do. So when it comes to implementing things like charters, that will be the chance that you can get them with facilitated people who are knowledgeable and can go through the right process. You can get them to think more above the parapet, a bit more about their team, their clients, the organization, and come up with something that works for all of them. So having those facilitated conversations is really key. Yeah, I think it's a difficult one, but there is a process that you can go through to come up with the right results.
Right, thank you. Emma, did you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I think we've been doing facilitated workshops with managers exactly around this and sort of peer-to-peer learning. So I think it's important to put enough checks and balances in along the way that you would hope that you wouldn't get to that problem right at the end, and that teams at a sort of the lowest level of sort of team level, line managers for themselves work out what is good for them as individuals and what is good for their team in terms of delivering the service that they need to deliver, but also the team cohesion bit to make sure that they still feel part of a community and part of a team. So yeah, it's really important to design the change in a way to put in those checks and balances. But also, I think going back to just being really transparent that we were talking about a couple of questions ago, just clearly communicating that we will be evaluating how things are going and are we still meeting our output or our customer service levels, and if we're not, we will need to change something. Just being really open about that. But yeah, as Kristal said, we need to treat people as adults and most people want to do a good job. The majority do. Yeah.
Can I just add the other thing is going back to what Emma said a minute ago, what is your measure of success? Is it that you want to retain your talent? Is it that you want to attract more people? The more mandatory things that you put in place, the more of a challenge you achieving your success is going to be as well. So I'd say, the more you can adapt in terms of being ambitious in terms of what you want to achieve as an organization, and then giving autonomies to your employees, you're actually more likely to achieve the success that you're looking for as well.
Awesome, thank you. And I wanted to go back just a couple of points there, one of which was sort of cohesion and culture, which you mentioned, Emma. And obviously people are worried that distributed working, hybrid working, people spend less time face to face. You might lose a bit of your culture or momentum, or people might sort of go missing from that. How do you, Kristal, how do you protect sort of knowledge sharing and osmosis and serendipity and all those nice things that come from being together, sharing space, seeing each other, having, you know, informal chats? What's some thoughts around that, please?
So employees do want to be together. You know, we're naturally, you know, we're humans and we want human contact. So engaging with your employees about how and when they're going to come in and what they're going to do there is key. So when they come to the office, okay, in fact, let's step back one. When they have a new starter joining the team, what are they going to do, and agree within their charter or the guidance that they set? How are you going to support that employee coming on board? Well, actually, okay, we'll agree that we'll all be in the office for the first few days that they're there. We'll all be in the workspace. We'll rotate between us so that one of us is there one day a week with them. What does that employee, what's their learning experience? How do they choose to learn? So their preference might actually be to work from home and do more home learning. So I think it's understanding that you've got someone new coming on board. How are we going to support them as a team? So that would be part of your kind of regular team meetings. That person's joining next month. How are we going to support them? And then it's not just about new employees. It's about the ongoing knowledge sharing. So I've seen clients who have, you know, team lunches or working lunches where it's knowledge sharing. So there might be one member of the team that kind of presents to the group on a particular subject. Your employees are super bright people. They will come up with ideas if you give them the autonomy to do so, with how they can do that best. And the other thing that I think is really lovely, and I do with my team, is tandem working as well. So imagine that you're sat next to each other in an office, but actually you're not. And online, you can both have your screens on or off, but be there for each other, so that question that that employee would ask if they were sat next to you, they can still ask that, but you're just, you know, virtually working together in tandem, not necessarily on the same piece of work, but you're just supporting that employee. So there's lots of hybrid ways in which you can have that osmosis learning. But there's also, you know, structure that needs to be put around realistically. Just as you do if you were all in the office, how are you going to support that employee?
Thank you. And that deals well with the learning element of it. Emma, what about the more cultural aspects and sort of keeping people feeling bonded and together?
Yeah, sure. And I love that tandem idea. I'm going to steal that, Kristal. Yeah, around the cultural side, I think a lot of it boils down to some quite practical things, and then we need to change our mindsets about how we use our time, and how we and become very deliberate about how our diaries as well, what we do at home and what we do in the office. So some things that some around that, I think I'm encouraging the organisation at the House of Commons to, when for the hybrid workers, to keep their diaries really free when they're in the office as much as possible, other than sort of engagement events that they've come in specifically for, and to really prioritise things like lunches together. So it's a bit of a shift. It's quite a shift in mindset for people, because actually when you're in the office, you're now becoming productive in a very different way to when you're at home. And so you can't expect yourself to have, it's a different output when you're in the office if you're a hybrid worker. So you have to get your head around that. But something that I think will become more important around culture, it's not, I think we're moving away from our key networks being around sort of our own teams and then the people we work with. I think it's going to become much more, will need to become much more about communities of practice as well. So people within your organisation that do similar roles but maybe are in different teams, and also communities of interest, stuff you're interested in outside of work. So really, I think we'll need to deliberately build those to expand people's networks within the organisation, so they know more people. So when there are less people, particularly in the office, actually you really keep that culture more. So that's something I'm experimenting with at the moment.
So those communities of virtual and digital, do you mean by that? Are they sort of Slack groups and physical meetups and a mix of the two, or how do they usually work?
No, exactly that. Yeah, they start and it's about making visible what people are interested in and what their skills are. So really, it starts off by like pen portraits is something that I quite like using. So you really understand what people's background is and what their interests are and how they like to work together and how they don't like to work together and that kind of thing. So that's really, and then finding ways to make that visible to the organisation. So just really simple things like, yeah, we use SharePoint, and then we're going to start to organise physical meetups as well. The other thing I was going to say is that kind of connected to this is that we've been encouraging people back to the office who who is still working remotely since the pandemic, just for a coffee morning or that kind of thing. Because what I found is that once people come back in, they remember the things they really like about it. And after 2 or 3 years of not going in, you do forget. And that has changed people's work patterns, and they've remembered the innate need for human connection. And so I think that is a very tangible thing that we can do at this point in time, is to get people in a safe way, but for something social that is about connecting with the company culture.
Yeah, great, thank you. And Kristal, in terms of bringing people in, like obviously organisations have got to rethink what they use their space for. What should they be thinking about when they're thinking about their office space and how they use that? What are some of the key points that they should be considering?
So the thing that comes up more than anything with the engagement work that we do is noise. So people are so much more sensitive to noise than ever before because they've been at home in a quiet environment. So I think large businesses or organizations thinking that we can just have a few hot desks in a big open plan environment is not the answer, and it's not future thinking at all. Employees who have that environment to work in will self-select to work from home if they have that choice because it's just too noisy. And they will say, well, I can't get anything done. I'm too distracted. So I think, the future of shared spaces when it comes to hybrid is more broken plan, more quiet and focused working areas where people are, not really allowed to have phone calls. Having a really kind of library space is something actually that we're seeing a trend for as well. And then having separate collaboration spaces where teams can get together and be noisy, whether that's in meeting rooms or not. Using smart building tech to plan desks together, space together, time together, and also to use it to see when other people are in. So you can see, well, actually, those days are really busy, but that day, Monday and Friday, typically, is nice and quiet. So let's go in then. Businesses are having to use more planting, more noise absorption in their space design, more booths, phone boxes, those types of things where people can go and have a call, whether it's a client call or a Teams call, in the quiet space, but also so that they're not disturbing colleagues. And then, as Emma said, like planning the time that you spend in the office so that you're not having a day of Teams calls in your diary. It's so important that when employees leave after a day in their workspace, that they feel like it was worth me coming in. I achieved things like today that I couldn't have achieved at home, whether that's, the human contact, the collaboration, and so on. So I think considering how the physical workspace can be adapted, and I'm all about the sustainability, so how you can reuse your current office furniture, how you can create more simple solutions, is really, really important as things go forward. And one of the stats I saw on this is 63% of organizations haven't yet adapted their office spaces at all to like compared to pre-pandemic. So absolutely, those spaces that they had before would have been used in a completely different way. The noise levels would have been different, and they just won't work. And employees will start to look for more forward-thinking employers who have, more adaptable, more well-suited to hybrid working spaces. The other stat, which came from McKinsey, I thought was really interesting, was that 3/4 of C-suite execs believed that the primary workspace would be the office, whereas 3/4 of employees thought their primary place of work would actually be working remotely. So
Right.
there's a real contrast between what employers think is going to happen and what employees want to happen. So that balance between the two and creating the right space is really, really important. And then the final, sorry.
Sorry, where do you think the eventual power will lie in that dynamic? Who at the end of the day will dictate that? Do you think it'll be the market forces of not being able to get talent, or do you think it will be businesses who eventually will sort of toe the same lines and rewrite the rules?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that some businesses have actually gone out and said we won't adapt hybrid working. Everyone needs to come back to the office. So it'd be interesting to see what the retention of those businesses is. I think naturally it will fall somewhere in the middle. I think most employees want to work in the office 1 or 2 days a week. Most employers want them to work in the office 3 or 4 days a week. It'll balance somewhere in the middle. But I do think the power is with the talent. It's becoming more and more difficult to attract and retain talent without adapting your ways of working. But I do feel like I'm speaking too much about office workers, as Emma and I have already said. It isn't that simple in organisations.
Yeah. Emma, what are your thoughts on that subject? Where do you see things heading, say 5 years' time? Where do you think we'll settle?
Oh, well, that. But what I found really interesting is I've been watching what the like city banks, the big banks, have been doing, and last summer when people were able to go back to the office for a period, they were quite the majority took a stance against hybrid, but at the beginning of this year, most of them have completely turned around and realised, as the job market has become way more competitive, completely turned around and are really promoting hybrid and flexible working options as well, sort of contractual ones like job shares and compressed hours and that kind of thing. And they're seeing it as a competitive advantage. So my hope is that both those contractual and the sort of the hybrid flexibility remains there for the next 5 years. I think it will have so many benefits, not just for individuals and organizations, but also like the way our world works, like commuting. Like if we could commute all through the day rather than just at that time, it's better for the transport system, it's better for us as individuals. So my hope is in 5 years' time that we have moved along the way. I expect that we will get to a bit of a compromise.
Yeah.
As Kristal says. Yeah.
And we're sort of going to wrap up now because we're approaching the 45-minute mark. Unless anyone's got any questions they'd like to jump in, just drop them in chat. We will try and address those. A couple of bits to finish on. I think, Ashley just sent a message which says, how do larger organisations fulfil their duty of care? And I have to go back in now because it's vanished off my screen. How do larger organisations fulfil their duty of care in terms of compliant furniture for home workers? The kitchen table can't be acceptable anymore, surely. That is a question I had earlier, but I didn't get to actually. What is the responsibility of a business to provide, or at least help with, good home working conditions?
Which of us do you want?
Nobody wants to take that one on, Ashley. Way too difficult.
It's a really tricky one. I think so we are ensuring that everyone does a I've forgotten the term, like an assessment.
Yeah.
Help me out.
DSE assessment.
DSE, that's the acronym. And also sort of advising on the right furniture as well. But it's really tricky because everyone has different home circumstances. So I think that's why the element, because everyone has such different home circumstances, it means that each individual has a different need or want or desire to use the office as well. So I think it feeds into that choice too. But I think the duty of care is that those to ensure those assessments are done if you choose to work a lot of your time from home.
We were at the beginning of the pandemic, we would hear from businesses who were saying our employers are asking us to contribute to their heating and gas and electric bills because they've got to work from home and they should be covered. And that sounded quite outlandish at the time, but things like that and covering the cost of commuting are becoming more and more sort of talked about, aren't they? So I wonder if that stuff will change as the landscape shifts too.
Yeah,
Kristal,
so
sorry, you had something to say there.
yeah, some of our clients are creating a kind of one-off payment. So it might be 200, 250 pounds to every employee to help them, I suppose, embed more home working in there. So it might be a new desk, a more comfortable chair. You know, most people have got some kind of setup. But just as a kind of acknowledgement that there's a change. But generally, I think the feeling about paying for utilities is now kind of gone away. They're not going to do that, but we will do something to support you. And most employers think, well, the cost of utilities is outlaid by the reduction in commuting costs, and there's a kind of balance there. But I agree with Emma. You know, those that have a real need from a health and safety perspective, because of a disability or it's absolutely need to be supported. It's a difficult one.
It is tricky. Robert Chapman's asked about your viewpoints on the relevance of real estate. So whether businesses will tend to co-working spaces rather than leasing sort of large office spaces. What are your perspectives on that?
Emma, go on.
Sorry. It's really hard to answer that on like a sort of general scale. It really depends on the type of business, I think. But and whether and what the corporate strategy is. In terms of co-working and so on, if part of the rationale behind hybrid is to have a more distributed workforce, then maybe that is a good option. If your office is in Bath, and but you want to employ people all over the UK, and you want to give them choice about where they can work, not just at home, then maybe a co-working is a good option. But I would always say test it out first, have it as part of your experimental phase, and see how that works for the organisation. I think the office is going to become more and more a hub for company culture, but that is going to mean a very different thing for each organisation too. So I haven't given you a definitive answer, but I think it's very difficult to on it.
I think you see them when you can. I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Brilliant. The office is a hub of company culture. We're going to wrap up there, I think, unless there are any further comments. A couple of plugs going on in the chat, that's fine. Are there any final things? It'd be interesting, I guess, from both your perspective, to see what you think a lot of businesses are currently getting wrong about hybrid that they should address as maybe a final point. Kristal, maybe we'll start with you on that one.
So I think something that we haven't covered and that employers are not necessarily considering as much is the sustainability aspect of hybrid working. So obviously people think we're not commuting, so that's more sustainable. But actually, someone living in a Victorian terraced house in Bristol, heating the entire house to work there for a day is not more environmentally responsible than someone cycling to an office in central Bristol, which is a modern office, which is much more set up for that. So I think as we move to businesses getting kind of closer to net zero, carbon reporting, trying to focus more on the environmental, social and governance, so ESG measures, there will be more of a focus on, are we going to have to in future report on where everybody is and what the environmental footprint of that is and the impact. So I think we'll see more trends going forward in the space of ESG when it comes to hybrid working. And going back to the question before, yes, offices as hubs, but perhaps more local hublets is a trend that we're seeing. Or certainly conversations we're having with clients where they have a more local space, which could be a co-working space, or for a large organisation, it could be a smaller complete office or hublet for people to work in, which just means that it's less commuting, but more environmentally sound.
Hublets, not heard that before. I'll keep that. Thank you. Nice. We have got an ESG white paper available on our website as well, if you're a business looking to find out what ESG means for you. We're going to wrap up. Emma, I'll just come to you on that question quickly. But Kristal, where can people find you if they're looking for a bit more of your wisdom?
So if you look me up on LinkedIn, or I am Workwell Bristol, you can search on Google, or work-well.co.uk.
Just search on Google. Thanks.
Yeah.
Emma, so
what
would you like to wrap up on, or what do you see lots of organisations getting wrong about hybrid at the moment?
Well, I don't know for a fact, but I wonder if organisations are getting wrong mandating a number of days per week. People come in, especially organisations that have a really varied workforce. And I'm trying to think more about number of days per year, perhaps, or looking more at longer time periods, because a lot of people's work flow isn't always on a weekly basis. Sometimes might be more beneficial to be in the office for a whole week, a month, and then not there for 3 weeks or something like that. So yeah, I wonder if that's something we've been jumping too soon on.
Great, thank you. And if people want to find you, they can just turn up at the House of Commons. What's your...
Absolutely, it's nothing. LinkedIn is great.
Good one.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you both so much. That was really interesting. I really enjoyed it, and I've learned a lot, especially about hublets. That's brilliant. Thanks for joining us. Everyone who's dialed in, we'll
Thank you,
send the video
Toby.
out afterwards, so this is recorded forever. Thank you very much. It's been great. See you soon.
Cheers.
Bye.